Would you like me to seduce you?
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, he walks into mine.
Why is the rum always good?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
It's a trap.
Every town has an Elm Street.
Trust no one, Mr. Miller.
Nice night for a walk.
Groovy.
Hey guys, welcome to the Celluloid Fiends podcast. I'm your host, Mo Long. You can follow me at Mitchell C. Long on Twitter and Instagram, as well as read my writing on film and a lot more at cupofmo.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it, and we'd also love if you went to the iTunes store or Podcast Addict, Stitcher, Spotify, and subscribed, as well as left us a rating and left us a review. And I am joined in the studio by my wonderful co-host.
What's up, Celluloid Fiends? It's Gabriel Ortel. If you want to go ahead and give us a like on Facebook, that would be fan-fucking-tastic.
You can also follow us on Twitter at Celluloid Fiends. And you know what? We're enjoying making the picks, but we also want to hear from you guys what movies you want us to feature on the podcast. So hit us up, let us know what you want us to review, and we will shout you out on the show if you do. Tonight, we are talking about the legendary film Lord of Illusions.
Cue the jack-off music.
I'll just insert that in there when I'm doing the editing. This is one of my all-time favorite films. And if you've been listening to the podcast since its inception, you probably already fucking know that. For those of you who aren't familiar with Lord of Illusions, this movie came out in 1995. It was written and directed by Clive Barker, and it was based on his short story, The Last Illusion. It had a budget of $11 million, and it made a modest $13.3 million at the box office. Lord of Illusions currently holds a 61% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes with a 52% audience score. It stars Scott Bakula, Famke Janssen, Daniel von Bargen, and Kevin J. O'Connor. It opens up in 1982, where cult leader Nyx, also known as the Puritan, uses real magic, and a party of disillusioned, see what I did there, former cult members, including Philip Swan and Casper Quaid, raid the cult complex, where Nyx has kidnapped a young girl and plans to sacrifice her. Swan manages to subdue Nyx and buries him in the desert, but not before Nyx attacks him with magic. 13 years later, private investigator Harry D'Amour, who has a taste for the occult, is hired for a job in Los Angeles. And what begins as a routine surveillance job leads D'Amour to a dying fortune teller, Quaid. He's then hired by Swan's wife, Dorothea, after they learn of Quaid's death. And Moore accompanies Dorothea to one of Swan's shows where the now famous illusionist seemingly dies, which puts him onto the trail of Nyx. So, what was your first experience with this movie?
My first experience with this movie is I saw it when I first moved to North Carolina. About 10 years ago, I saw this movie. 2010, 11, I saw this movie. It was during a time where I didn't have a lot of friends, and I just buy and watch movies all the time. And I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. It's a Clive Barker classic in my eyes. Nothing really against it. I love Scott Bakula, obviously. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite movies, but it definitely holds high praises in my book.
At the risk of giving away my rating, which I probably did from the first Celluloid Fiends episode ever, this is one of my favorite movies. I originally found out about this from a sample in a Jedi Mind Trick song, actually. It was the Immaculate Conception off of the Psychosocial LP, and it samples Famke's quote of, "Flesh is a trap, but magic sets us free." I was like, what is this from? So I ended up looking it up, and I watched the trailer, and it seemed like kind of a neat movie, and I ended up checking it out. This was probably back in 2011, and I've watched it quite a few times ever since. I picked this because I feel like it's a very underappreciated film. And I would love to see it have a resurgence and gain a cult following.
Before we get into the review of this movie, I just want Mo to go over the extent of his Lord of Illusions collection, including the poster above his bed.
Well, all right. So I have two posters for this. I have an original one sheet above my bed, which our mutual friend Kenny Caperton of Myers House NC Acclaim actually gave to me as a Christmas present a while back. I have a smaller poster hanging up in my living room, and that I think came with the Shout Factory Blu-ray release that I ended up purchasing. I have the collector's edition Blu-ray, which I just mentioned. I have a VHS copy, and I have a DVD, and I have the Laserdisc.
So I just wanted Mo to do that so you could see the extent of how much Mo loves this movie.
I have the soundtrack, just the MP3s. I bought it on like Amazon or something a while back. And the desktop wallpaper on my computer is a Lord of Illusions poster. So there you have it. That's the extent of my Lord of Illusions collection for now. This, to me, just feels very unique on a number of levels. Like, for one, it's very distinctly a Clive Barker film. Anything that Clive Barker directed has a unique style to it. But for a Clive Barker film, this actually feels really subdued.
Oh, yeah. But for it being subdued, there's certain traits that you can tell it's still a Clive Barker film. One of those things is the violence.
Oh, yeah. And the violence is pretty heavy-handed in this. He takes the gore down a couple notches when you compare it to something like Hellraiser, but when you compare fucking anything to Hellraiser, it's less gory. But, yeah, it's a pretty brutal movie from the onset. Like, even that opening scene at the Nix's complex with the little girl who's about to be sacrificed.
Right.
Like, that was a pretty intense opening segment. And, of course, you have the soundtrack, which was composed by Simon Boswell, over top with like warbling voices and just filled with a lot of timpani and really crafted an ominous overtone.
Which is almost like a Clive Barker staple. The soundtrack goes hand in hand with Clive Barker movies. Especially movies like this, and I would say Hellraiser also.
Absolutely. And fun fact about Lord of Illusions, but the soundtrack was originally supposed to be composed by Christopher Young, who scored at least the first two Hellraiser soundtracks, if not more. But there were some post-production issues, and so Simon Boswell ended up taking it over. And I felt like he did something different than Christopher Young would have done, but there are a lot of Christopher Young musical cues in there, especially the booming timpani. And that was one of my favorite elements of the movie, actually, the soundtrack.
I gotta be honest with you, I never realized how much a part the soundtrack played in this movie until we watched it again the other night, and I actually downloaded it as soon as Mo left my apartment.
Well, I think I was still there. It was like while the closing credits were rolling, and I looked over and you were on your phone, and you were like, "I'm downloading the soundtrack."
If there's anything that I am definitely a soundtrack guy. I have a lot of movie soundtracks. It's just something I like to listen to while I'm at work or doing something at home. Movie soundtracks are just something that I really love.
Oh, same here. I get so fascinated with movie soundtracks, and I use movie soundtracks a lot for background music while I'm writing. So I'm going in with a hard question here. Top 5 favorite movie soundtracks.
Okay.
Or we could do a top 10 if you want.
I'll do top 5. I can't give a certain order, but I can give you my 5 favorite. First, I would have to say Space Jam.
Oh, that's a classic.
Space Jam. Halloween. What's another one? I'm trying to think of ones that I have. The Hellraiser soundtrack. Nightmare on Elm Street. And I'm trying to pick a good one. I would have to say Evil Dead.
That was a good sleeper pick. The Evil Dead soundtrack is ridiculously underappreciated. I'm going to go with, again, in no particular order, Lord of Illusions, Hellraiser. I'm going to go with Warlock. I love pretty much anything that Jerry Goldsmith composed, and I think that's one of his more underrated soundtracks. I didn't realize he composed some music for the Mulan soundtrack. I might have to throw Space Jam in there as well. Like, I had the cassette back in the day. I have a CD of it now. I'm waiting for the vinyl release. And, you know, I might have to go Big Trouble in Little China. Or, you know what? No, Phantasm.
Phantasm has a great soundtrack. And let's also not forget the marvelous Star... Like, there's a bunch of songs. Like, there's the Star Wars soundtrack. Stuff like that. Like, always makes me happy. The Home Alone soundtrack.
Most of the Alien movies.
Oh, yeah.
What I tend to find with my favorite soundtracks is often a lot of them are composed by sort of the same group of people. Like, pretty much anything that Jerry Goldsmith did. Love it.
And let's not forget the kings of the horror movie soundtrack, the band Goblin.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, John Carpenter.
Yes, John Carpenter.
John Williams did Star Wars.
John Williams did a lot. He did Star Wars. He did Jaws. He did Jurassic Park. He did a lot of movies.
James Horner. We can't forget James Horner. He was very prolific as well. He did Aliens, and he did the Brainstorm soundtrack. Yeah, I love pretty much anything he did. So, getting back to Lord of Illusions, one unique quality I think this has is sort of the way it's a bit of a genre bender. And we were sort of discussing something similar with Get Out, actually, earlier.
Yes.
And saying that Get Out feels more like a thriller, but with horror elements in it.
Absolutely.
Lord of Illusions to me feels like a noir film that has horror elements peppered throughout. Especially with the heavy-handed gore and the frightening soundtrack. I think you have to call it a horror film, but
it's kind of like a fantasy type movie too.
100%.
And also a mystery.
Yeah. So I like the way it mashes up genres a bit, and it feels cohesive though, despite that. Unlike something like Life Force, which I adore that movie. And Gabe, you haven't seen that one.
I have not seen Life Force.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a movie Gabe has not seen, but I have seen.
It's the Celluloid Fiends first.
Yeah, I feel like whenever movies come up that one of us hasn't seen, it's usually me, and you're like, you gotta watch that. So I feel very proud at this moment that there's a film that I can bring up on the podcast that I've seen and you haven't. We'll have to have a whiteboard where we start keeping score now. But Life Force sort of does the same thing, except it's a little more disjointed, and it's almost like listening to a symphony with different movements where it just drastically shifts genres, whereas Lord of Illusions does feel very cohesive.
Right.
And I think the magic is really what gives it that fantasy vibe that you mentioned. And in particular, the scenes, the beginning and the end with Nyx, where you actually see magic being performed, as well as, I would say, the visit to the Magic Castle.
Yes, yes. And the Magic Castle is a real place. It is in Los Angeles. It is a private club for magicians and to do tricks together.
I did not realize that until after the movie, and I was looking the first time I saw this, and I was looking up the locations, and I was like, oh shit, Magic Castle is a real fucking place.
It is.
And ever since then, I've wanted to go visit. But I really liked that scene a lot, and I want to talk about that a bit more, because it had a very light tone to it.
Oh, yes. But, like, in movies like Clive Barker's, there always seems to be something that's lighthearted in it. And I feel like you gotta do that with some of his movies. Because if it's just dark and grim and awful the whole time, I think you lose viewers.
Agreed. Although, I do feel like Hellraiser and Hellraiser 2, which I almost look at those as just one movie.
Oh, yeah.
Those don't really seem to have anything fucking lighthearted at all.
Right, but that's almost like Clive Barker's, like baby. Like, I'm not saying Lord of Illusions isn't a baby, but Hellraiser is his real baby.
Oh, yes. And
that and Nightbreed.
Yeah, I have not seen Nightbreed. Okay. We're tied for this episode so far with not having seen movies. Scott Bakula's performance, I think, really notably helps give this movie a lighthearted feel to it. Because it seems like he didn't really take himself too seriously in this movie. And he knew when to be serious and when to be a little campy. And the character of Harry D'Amour, he's pretty goofy in this movie.
Now, here's the real question. At the end of Lord of Illusions, does he leap back home?
Oh, boy. Lord of Illusions is actually just an extended episode of Quantum Leap.
It's Quantum Leap, the movie, ladies and gentlemen.
I could sort of see that.
Does he finally get home after Lord of Illusions?
You know, I'm going to say this is actually the homecoming. So the beginning of the movie, there was a scene cut out where he leaped home, and this was the home he leaped to.
Really?
Yeah, it was a bit of a dystopian episode. He changed careers a little bit, became a private investigator with a specialty in the occult. But was he a drunk? I don't know if I'd say he was a drunk.
He was a fuck up, definitely.
Well, sorta. But I think he was chasing his demons with, quite literally demons, with alcohol. I think that's what he was doing in a few scenes. But yeah, I really liked, it was the first scene where he's in the car with Valentin, who is Swan's butler. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated the way Scott Bakula pulled that off in stepping into the role of Harry D'Amour, because he shows that he has investigative chops, but he does it in a way that's kind of goofy. And I just appreciated the way he sort of brought that character to life.
Oh, yes. Scott Bakula is and always will be a fantastic actor.
Oh, yeah. I think he's very underappreciated. I think he deserves more credit than he currently gets. I think he's most well known for Quantum Leap and a lot of his television work. Like,
Right.
he's on NCIS New Orleans, which I'm actually a big fan of that because of Scott Bakula, of course, but also I lived in New Orleans for a few months, so it's kind of fun watching and seeing places that I used to gallivant around.
He was also in an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
You've mentioned that, and I remember once I got a text from you, and you were fucking watching that, and you like paused it on TV and took a picture.
Yep, and I sent you the picture. Scott Bakula in that episode plays Scott Bakula as a janitor at an old person's home.
Oh, wait. Was this a Bubba Hotep prequel?
Oh.
Have you read any Clive Barker?
I have not read the books.
I haven't read as much as I probably should, but I did read the novella of Hellraiser, and I read the short story of Lord of Illusions, which is called The Last Illusion, and it is very different than the movie.
Isn't the Hellraiser one pretty different from Hellraiser also?
In some ways, but I did feel like the two were more similar than The Last Illusion was from Lord of Illusions. Like, those two works are drastically different. But one thing that I didn't realize until after I watched Lord of Illusions and then started reading some more about a lot of Barker's literature is the character of Harry D'Amour is very prevalent in a lot of his works. And something that I would have liked to see, which unfortunately didn't happen, is maybe a film series or even a television series that featured that character more. Because I think this really could have been franchised pretty well.
Oh, yeah. I think Scott Bakula would have done a bang-up job in like a film series or a TV show just of Clive Barker's work.
Yeah, I think that would have been phenomenal. I'm really curious, though, why this movie didn't perform better than it did at the box office.
It came out in 1995, and I think people were starting to go a different route with horror movies. You gotta remember, Scream came out around this time.
Yeah. And you also had some stuff like Seven, which I'd call that a horror movie.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. I do think it was, unfortunately, just sort of a shift in the horror paradigm at the time.
I feel if this movie came out in the late 80s, it would have fared a little better.
Yeah, because it's more straightforward horror, although, like we mentioned, it does opt for some different genre cues, but it is more serious horror, and I think kind of in the mid to late 90s, you were seeing a lot of mix-up in the horror.
And it's not only
genre.
that, in the 90s, we started to shift back to the 70s mentality of having horror movies be about teenagers.
Yeah, and this features no teenagers.
Right.
At all.
Because we had, like, Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, we had Final Destination, and everything was very teen-oriented. They were trying to get kids back to the movies.
Even a lot of the knockoff horror movies that were coming out around the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, like Generation X, were very like teen slasher film format.
Right.
Whether they were sticking with the tropes of the horror genre or whether they were subverting those tropes.
And I remember when Scream first came out, everybody in my school wanted to see Scream. They all wanted to go see it in the theater. None of us were old enough, so what we'd do is we would buy a ticket to another movie and then go get our ticket torn and then go into the theater that was showing the rated R movie.
Is that what you did for Scream?
Yes.
Yeah, I did not do that for Scream. I think it was like I don't know, 6 when that came out or something. So
I actually did that also for the Blair Witch Project. And funny story, I told the director of the Blair Witch Project that I did that.
What was his reaction?
You owe me $7.
So did you pay up?
No. No, he's fucking with me, obviously.
Yeah. No, I'm sure he was.
His daughter was there. She was like, "Daddy, why would people have to sneak into your movies?" He goes like, kids had to do that to see my movie. It's okay. It's like, I never sneak into movies. Like, yeah, because we allow you to watch horror movies.
And with that, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to keep talking about Lord of Illusions.
Something is watching. Something is listening. Something is coming.
How would you like to see the world the way it really is?
What's going on here? Detective Harry Damour is walking a path.
I want you to help me. Will you take the job, Mr. Damour?
Where do I sign up?
Between what can be seen.
People are dying here. I want to know why. I've heard a name. Somebody they talk about in whispers. Who? Nix.
And what must be feared.
Nix is dead and buried. What the hell is wrong with you people?
Haven't you seen enough to know that doesn't matter?
Now.
I don't want him getting in the way. We've always waited too long to have the homecoming spoiled.
Every step he takes.
The drone to the dark side. You don't like that.
Not much.
It's your destiny. Accept it.
Brings him closer to the truth.
He could get into people's heads, make them see things. Terrible things.
See, that's his best trick. No illusions, just the truth.
If Nix is back from the dead, then he is some kind of a god.
In a world where magic is real, death is the ultimate illusion.
I was born to murder the world. Are you ready for my wisdom?
It's not real. Stop looking at me!
Nix! You want to come with me, Damour? I've got so much power to give you. All you have to do is beg.
Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions.
Hey guys, welcome back. We are talking about the 1995 Clive Barker film, Lord of Illusions. I want to dig into some of the more technical aspects of this movie. I loved the cinematography. I thought that was quite well done. And we touched on the soundtrack a little bit. And I think that's very crucial to this movie, like you were saying before. Because at certain moments, it lends this sort of Chinatown vibe. Like when in the graveyard where Damour first sees Dorothea.
Oh, yeah.
And there's sort of this love theme that's playing. And I think Damour cracks some joke to Valentin at that point and says something to the effect of, "Are there any movie stars buried here?" And it's just a really silly and kind of lighthearted scene. But then you compare that to the opening segment and, of course, the final showdown with Nix. And there are these warbling voices, or there's a lot of timpani. So I think it would be weird to watch this movie without the soundtrack. And then Also, I loved a lot of the locations and the effects. I thought, for the most part, the effects held up very well.
Yeah, there are a couple things, though, that kind of date it a little bit with the Polygon Man, whatever he was.
That one scene is just really shit-tastic. Like, even for 1995, the CG was really bad. So, this is a scene where D'Amour is sleeping with Dorothea, and it is presumed that Swan is dead. And suddenly, like, this weird Polygon Man, that's the only way I can describe him, shows up, and it's magic sent from Swan.
Right.
But it's just a bunch of triangles that are two-dimensional that are put together, and I really do not understand what happened. Like, did they just run out of budget for that one scene? Like, the practical effects in this movie hold up so well. And then there's this shitty CG moment.
I also think some of the scenes where they're, like, using fire or, like, spitting fire or whatever, it kind of looks shitty, but, like, the practical effects in this movie are amazing, bar none.
Oh, yeah. I agree about the fire. I think there's the opening scene, and there might be one at the end as well when Nix is throwing fire between his hands, and he's like, "And the fire said to me." And it looks like a shoddy Photoshop job.
It does, but those were the times. I'm sure Clive Barker didn't have a mega budget for this movie.
He had $11 million for this, which that was pretty low for a director like him. And I'm actually surprised it was that low because I'm not sure what the budget for Hellraiser was, but I'm sure it had to be higher. It looks like that was a budget of $1 million.
Why, Hellraiser?
Is that right?
Well, Hellraiser is also older.
True. But $1 million seems low.
It is low.
And it made 14 at the box office.
Hellraiser only made 14?
Yeah. But, I mean, that's a pretty decent return on your investment there. When you make a movie for $1 million and you make 14 at the fucking box office. And that's not even including all of the home video sales.
Right.
And
merchandising and stuff like that.
Yeah. But, so I guess he had a higher budget for Lord of Illusions. But yeah, maybe they just ran out of budget for the CG scenes. I don't know what happened there. I also thought a lot of the performances were very strong in this, and of course, notably Scott Bakula. And I think this is probably my favorite performance Scott Bakula has given. And I'd seen him before, like in Quantum Leap, for example. But this is the movie that made me appreciate his acting.
Oh, yes. This is definitely a reach from Quantum Leap.
Oh, yes. I think Daniel Von Bargen really steals pretty much every scene he's in as Nix. And I looked up his IMDb page a while back, and it seemed as though he had a pretty prolific career. But this is the only thing I think I've seen him in. And I just thought he was phenomenal as this insane cult leader. And speaking of which, one of my favorite scenes was really haunting. And it's after Nix is resurrected and his former followers abandon the lives that they're living and return to the cult compound. And there's this sort of happy music playing. And meanwhile, you're seeing these scenes of murdered families. Like, one person killed their husband and 2 small kids at the breakfast table and was on the way out. And one guy, like, lets a bunch of snakes out of the zoo where he's working. And it was just that's a very powerful scene. Like, as many times as I watch this movie, that's one of those scenes that just really gets me every time.
Oh, yeah. And I want to say Nix's a scary, scary villain.
Yeah. Because not only is he incredibly powerful, but essentially he just wants to watch the world burn. And he has that quote at the end where he says, "I was born to murder the world." He straight up kills pretty much all of his followers. And the only person that he really seems to care for is Swan, who rejected him, which I thought was kind of an odd decision, but I guess it was because he was the only follower that was worthy.
Right. Of destroying the world with him.
Right.
But there was a point where I think I can't quote it quote for quote, but at the end of the movie he was like, "Well, you can't murder the world with me now, but you can watch."
Yeah. That's the gist of what he's saying. Aside from the Polygon Man, which was that was an epic clusterfuck. There's one other aspect of Lord of Illusions that is pretty problematic, and that is the fact that Dorothea is the little girl who Nix was going to sacrifice at the beginning of the movie.
Who is now married to Swan.
Yeah, so adult Swan, former cult member turned rescuer, shows up, saves the little girl, and then ends up marrying her?
Pedophile.
Which it is implied that by Dorothea that they didn't necessarily marry for love, but still, that is a very, very creepy moment.
Oh, yeah.
And like you kind of saw it coming, like from the beginning, from like the first time you see Dorothea, you're like, okay, she's the fucking little girl at the beginning of the movie. Which I do want to touch on that a little bit. I think eventually it's clear that he wants to sacrifice the little girl, but like it wasn't explicitly stated, and it's not like clear why. Which I sort of appreciate at the same time. I kind of wish there were more backstory to like why he wants to sacrifice her and why there's like a monkey tied up there or something.
He is like a orangutan or ape just tied up down there just for no reason.
Yeah, and you're just like, what the fuck? Okay, whatever.
And the primate seems to be very angry.
Yeah, it was going bananas, as they say.
Oh.
We got dad jokes.
No, relax. There's no reason to go ape.
I gotta edit in a rim shot or something in here. Right? Oh, celluloid fiends. We got jokes. But yeah, I guess by the same merit, I do appreciate the world building that goes on in this, right? Like you know that Nix wants to sacrifice this girl. You don't know what purpose, if any, that serves.
Right.
And then similarly, I loved the beginning scene where Swan puts that iron mask on Nix because it seems like it's imbued with some sort of magic, but you're not entirely sure what properties it has. And then later on, one of Nix's loyal followers, Butterfield, rescues Nix, and he mentions something about having to craft the tools to revive him and remove the mask. So again, it insinuates a lot about the magic and the logic of the magic, but it doesn't really explain it. So
right.
it gives the idea that there's this sprawling magical universe and sort of like the seedy underbelly, and it doesn't really explain it, but it breathes life into this
and
film.
Hence where we could have had a film series or TV show explaining this world that Clive Barker created.
Absolutely. So why do you think the character of Harry D'Amour did not appear again in another movie or in a TV show?
I think it was just Lord of Illusions, while a great movie, it didn't fare as well as they would have liked. And if it doesn't make dollars in the film industry, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. That's probably the crux of it. Didn't bring in a lot of cash, and just, I guess, it fell by the wayside. Do you think this movie deserves a cult following?
Absolutely. Clive Barker has his own cult following anyways, but I think this movie is definitely one of his more unappreciated movies. I feel like Hellraiser and Nightbreed get more shine than Lord of Illusions does, but I definitely can see it taking its seat at the table of great Clive Barker movies.
I agree. And I do remember, so I've of course reviewed this, but I remember this was back in like 2016, I think. Bloody Disgusting posted an article in defense of Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions. So I think it's sort of starting to resurface a little bit, but it's a film that I sincerely hope gets rediscovered and maybe starts seeing some screenings back at the box office. I think this would be an awesome retro showing.
I think either this movie and Hellraiser or this movie or Nightbreed, we could have a great Clive Barker double feature.
Yeah, at Carolina Theater's Retro Film Series. I think that would be a very solid showing. I was really excited when Shout Factory decided to release the special edition Blu-ray several years back, the one that I ended up purchasing, because it included the director's cut as well as the theatrical version. And I was sort of hoping that would bring this movie back to the forefront and usher in some sort of cult following. Anyone I've talked to, interestingly, who has seen this appreciates it quite a bit, but it just doesn't seem to have a lot of airplay. I randomly found it like on TV a while back, but it was on some station. I can't remember what it was. It was like Comet TV or something, which probably just gets a lot of films and TV shows that
haven't already been picked up for syndication.
Yeah, and it's inexpensive to get the rights to show those and throw them on there, but oh well, maybe I'll get programmed into ABC's 13 Nights of Family. Then again, probably not. So, if you had to pick someone else to play the part of Harry D'Amour, who would you choose?
Whew. Like a today actor or just any actor? Any actor?
I'm going to go with any actor.
Bruce Willis.
I could definitely see Bruce Willis in that role. I could see Morgan Freeman doing a good job. I could see Dennis Quaid. I think Danny Glover could have done a phenomenal job at this as well.
William H. Macy.
Ooh. That's a good sleeper pick. Yeah, Gabe's got the sleeper picks tonight. Yeah, I could totally see that. Did you have any favorite scenes in the movie?
I definitely really enjoyed the scene where Swan does the illusion where he dies.
Yeah. That was a very impressive scene, and I think that illusion itself has been explored by, I believe it was David Blaine at one point, because it's an actual illusion, and that was a cool moment because, I mean, the effects are great. Like watching the swords actually plunge into Swan. It was very harrowing watching that occur, and the camera work really honed in on each sword like piercing his body and sort of like a slow-mo blood splatter. So it was difficult to watch. But even before that occurred, seeing this giant structure with all these swords spinning around, was an impressive set.
Very much.
That was one of my favorite scenes as well. I also loved the Magic Castle excursion.
Oh, yes.
And that was where it just, again, where it was very much a mystery film. I did feel like that was slightly disjointed in a few spots. Like, D'Amour goes to Magic Castle to look into Nix, who calls himself the Puritan, and sort of dig into whether magic was actually being performed. And he ends up teaming up with this magician there, Billy. And Billy seems to have no motivation at all to help D'Amour. And kind of whisks into the movie and then whisks out of the movie. And you're not really sure, A, why he helps D'Amour, but B, like, where he really came from. And it was just a weird scene, but I didn't really ask questions.
It's like D'Amour, he found a doddering old magician who had access to the magic. I was like, can you help me with this case? And this guy's just like, yeah, I got nothing else to do today.
And I can't remember that guy's name, but he was supposed to be like a well-known magician. The first dude. One thing I loved about that sequence, though, is there's this... there are all these traps in there to deter thieves. And one of them is projected, is this alien-looking creature that's projected from a hidden projector wall. And D'Amour shoots at it. I think he misses like the first one or two times before hitting it. And I loved that moment because typically in movies, heroes are perfect and they'll just like hit some improbable shot. And in Lord of Illusions, like D'Amour gets tossed around a bunch, he gets beat up, he's not a perfect shot. And I like that about this character. Like he's flawed.
Oh yeah. Definitely flawed.
He ultimately prevails, but he's flawed.
Oh yeah. But I think some of the best are flawed.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so great.
And that's what makes the character of D'Amour so likable.
Right. Because he's a human.
Exactly. And, props to Clive Barker for giving him that human quality. Did you have any least favorite scenes?
Polygon Man.
Yeah, that was my least favorite as well. And then I'd also say there's sort of a backstory about D'Amour being haunted by some exorcism that was performed in New York, because he's a private investigator from New York with a specialty in the occult. And sometime when he's in LA, he sort of has this dream that there's some weird demon fairy thing sitting on the edge of his bed. And it felt kind of stuck in. Like, it didn't really seem to have a place in the movie.
Like, it just could have not happened.
Yeah. It doesn't really bother me, but it doesn't really add anything to the movie. And I think that probably could have been left on the cutting room floor. But, yeah, overall, I think I like most scenes in the movie, except fucking Polygon Man.
Yep.
So, why don't we rate this bad boy?
Alright, let's do it up. I'm going to give this rating a 4. I think that it's a pretty flawless movie, except for the crummy CGI, which is why it lost a point in my book.
I am going to give it a 4.7. I don't think it's quite the perfect movie. I definitely think it has its flaws, but it just feels very unique. Not only for a Clive Barker film, but just for a horror film in general. I think it's mostly cohesive. I think it's probably the best performance Scott Bakula's ever given. This movie just really holds up upon subsequent rewatches, especially the effects, aside from some of the really shoddy CGI that's in there. I love the soundtrack. Cinematography is really on point. So, yeah. This is one of those movies that I can just rewatch over and over, and I'm still entertained.
Oh, it definitely has rewatchability.
And it has a ton of replay value, and I'm just I'm hoping it gets that revisionist history that it deserves. So, this is the episode that you've all been waiting for, the Lord of Illusions episode. So, that's our episode. Thanks again for listening. We really appreciate it. And once again, head over to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review, subscribe.
If you want to go ahead and give us a like on Facebook, that would be great also.
You can also follow us at Celluloid Fiends on Twitter. And if you want to follow me, you can check me out at Mitchell C. Long on Twitter and Instagram, as well as at cupofmo.com.
And once again, from the Celluloid Fiends, once you go Bacula,
you never go Bacula.
Please, for God's sake, please stop it. There's no more time. You've got to... Please, stop it. Stop it now. Turn it off. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.